And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, finally broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Jon.
Hello there. So you have some of that post-Sweden mania going on?
Yeah. Basically, I solved it by sleeping, as in a lot of sleeping. Um, in the last 4 days, I probably slept around 40 hours. So yeah, but it's slowly starting to get cured, but nevertheless, there's still some residual depression left from Sweden. But nevertheless, it's fantastic. It's very good to be back. It's very good to be away from that place. And particularly, it's good to be away from their wind. I mean, seriously, there isn't a moment when the wind doesn't blow in Sweden. And even in the middle of the summer, it still blows with very, very cold air. So you basically can't rely on the weather. It could be like 30 minutes is almost summer and it's very tolerable and whatnot. And then it suddenly starts raining because potato. So yeah, terrible weather. Speaking of the weather, how's been the weather on your end lately?
Yeah, I actually want to propose a new law that just states that there's some sort of maximum temperature, like maybe 25 degrees. And if it's above that, it just stops getting warmer. Let's just pass a law and fix that.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna need some of that in southeastern Europe for sure. The temperatures here have finally gotten towards normal. The problem is that normal during summertime in southeastern Europe, that's 40 degrees during the day, probably even a bit more than that. Now it's 9 p.m., 2 minutes past 9 p.m. here, and it's still like 36, 37 degrees Celsius. It's barely breathable. And in this part of the country, in the northwest, it's still decent, but I can only imagine what's going on with the fuckers in Bucharest, where it's even worse than that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be able to live there. That sounds oppressive.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's pretty much how things have gone around for the last 300 years or so, probably even a bit more than that. Extreme summers and extreme winters. It's probably the only place, at least in Europe, that has actually 4 seasons, not 2, because there's really radical difference between them. But yeah, we kind of go along. It's funny that there are very few global warming activists in this part of the world, because whenever there's something that they call extreme, you can easily find the last year or 2 years ago or 30 years ago example where it has been exactly the same. So it's very hard for them to argue anything. Other than that, I hope the audience doesn't get to hear the horrifying background noise. Apparently this mic is good enough that it doesn't bring that to you, because I can barely hear myself when the construction work next door starts its usual noise.
Yeah, at least on my end, I don't hear any background noise at all.
That's fantastic. Right, so we have a very short news section for this episode. Probably the journalists were also oppressed by the heat and they didn't want to write too much. Although from what I've heard in Scandinavia, it wasn't really that hot, but still a very, very tiny amount of news. But I guess we'll get to dissect them even more than usual, since we have enough time and we don't need to apply German efficiency.
Yeah, probably the weather explains why 40% of our news are from Scandinavia. So
fair enough. Right.
But let's start with Germany. Yep. From the Tagesspiegel. Sexist advertising to be banned in all of Berlin. Scantily clad women on billboards have been an unwelcome sight to Berlin politicians for some years now. In early 2014, Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg banned quote-unquote sexist advertising in 28 rentable advertising spaces. Other districts are now following suit, and the Red-Red-Green coalition is working on a ban. So that's the Social Democrats, the Left Party, and the Green Party. For new tenders of state-owned advertising spaces, quote, the exclusion of sexist advertising and discriminatory content has to be a non-negotiable requirement, the coalition agreement says. And for private advertising spaces, they also plan to, quote, verify and prevent discriminatory advertising by the formation of a committee of experts. The Left Party has submitted a similar proposal to the District Assembly of Charlottenburg-Wilmersdorf. The district office is supposed to exclude any advertisements which, quote, degrade people because of their sex, their sexual orientation, or their sexual identity in all of their advertising contracts. The Left Party has compiled a long catalogue of criteria for inadmissible advertising. For example, when women are portrayed as being beautiful, but at the same time, quote, in parentheses, emotionally weak, hysterical, stupid, not accountable, naive, completely ruled by emotions, etc. Moreover, it covers billboards which reduce women to a, quote, purchasable, sexually available object of desire. They also want to outlaw images in which, quote, the woman is clad very scantily or in a very body accentuating manner, while the man is completely and comfortably clothed, e.g. in a suit. This, they say, would give the impression that the sexes, quote, do not meet at eye level. The Assembly hasn't decided anything yet, but a majority for the proposal is to be expected since the SPD and the Greens have signaled their support. Conversely, the CDU believes that politicians had no right to, quote, interfere with the free advertising market, end quote, and instead advocated for changing hearts and minds in the ad agencies and in companies. The FDP sees advertising as being, quote, protected by our constitutionally guaranteed freedom of speech. The AfD criticizes the, quote, ban-happy, holier-than-thou experts. So, how big is the problem in Berlin? He wasn't currently aware of any sexist advertising in Charlottenburg-Wilmersdorf amidst Die Linke faction leader Niklas Schenker. It was a matter of principle. And then it goes on to list some of the most recent sort of instances, which are all quite they're all quite a while ago, and it's basically all really, really petty stuff. Like they go into one example of an ad for public transport that tells people that they can now take pets on public transport, and it says, Sie brauchen Ihre Möpse nicht verstecken, which means you don't have to hide your pugs. And there's a picture of a person holding a pug, and it's sort of a double entendre because Möpse, that is pugs, also means breasts in German, and therefore that's considered sexist advertising and whatever. It's just really, really petty stuff.
I have a solution to that. Let's get that Scottish guy's Nazi pug and replace it. Oh wait, you can't do that in Germany. That's unfortunate. In all seriousness, why do these initiatives, I mean, I know it's going to sound a bit ironic me asking this, but seriously, why do these initiatives keep on coming almost always, well, I would say always, from the very, very far left fringes of the far left, and always in capital cities where they dominated, because there's that thing. Oh, it's all sides are the same. No, they're not the same. I cannot imagine AFD or Sverige Demokraten or Le Républicain in France, or I can't imagine any of these guys are arguing for these things. It's always the far left. Why?
I mean, it's not even the far left. It's just the general left.
Yeah, but in this case, the initiative comes from Die Linke, and then all the other leftists, they just slowly fall in line, right?
Yeah, it definitely comes more from the left part of the left spectrum, but it's an idea that's supported like across the left, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
As for why it is in capital cities, I have no idea really.
I mean, Rome pulled such thing when the socialists were leading the city, and
as did Madrid.
Madrid, yes, when Podemos and the Socialista, what's the Workers' Party, Partido Socialista Obrero Español, was leading the city. Now Stockholm is trying the same thing. Exactly when the red green, it's also the same thing. The red green alliance leads the city because it's the former Communist Party, the Vänsterpartiet, the environmentalists, the Miljöpartiet, and the Social Democrats. In Paris, the same thing. While the socialists still have the power, probably they won't following the next local elections. But still, it's always the same, and it's almost always in capital cities. Why? What do they think they are accomplishing? I'm trying to understand their framework of thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's sort of a general dislike of advertising on the left, just from the sort of anti-capitalist mentality. So they specifically like to go after advertisers.
And the anti-sexism is just an excuse.
Yeah, not necessarily an excuse, but it's like it sort of fits. It sort of fits together these sort of feminist ideas with the anti-capitalist ones. So it's sort of an easy target and very satisfying to them.
I see. Yeah, it sort of makes sense. But again, as you pointed out, they don't even have examples, and even some of them acknowledge that. Look, we don't really have a sexist advertising problem to begin with. It's just a circle jerk, or as they would say, it's a matter of principle.
Yeah, so basically, for this sort of non-existent problem, that every new ad is, according to this plan, supposed to go through some sort of a committee of experts that tries to check whether it's sexist or not. It's just insane.
And I don't know how they do it in Germany, but if such initiative were to be adopted in Sweden, that would mean a lot more new jobs for feminists. I mean, in Sweden, there is an entire cottage industry to school feminists, and you get LGBT certification and you get gender certification. I'm not joking. And with those kinds of quote unquote certifications, you get employment in all of these ban happy local agencies. Probably they intend to do the same thing in Germany, or at least in Berlin, to be sure.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it's going to work out. I mean, it's still in the proposal phase right now. So how the actual committee is going to be run, I don't know if I have any idea, but presumably it's going to be something like that.
Yeah, the English language version of the article from the local, it says that the HIP district, Kreuzberg Friedrichshain, has already banned the sexist advertising on 28 publicly owned billboards since 2014. So the most leftist district in Berlin have already done that, but they don't seem to be happy to doing that in, let's put it this way, their areas. They want the same rules to be extended to everyone, regardless of whether they like it or not.
Yeah, and very importantly, they're now also targeting private advertising spaces. I mean, it's one thing to say that you have this, city-owned billboards, and city is going to decide what the rules are for putting advertising on that. I mean, okay, fine, but if you go after privately owned billboards and advertising spaces, that's a whole very different matter.
And again, they haven't managed to. I mean, that's how I understand when you want to develop public policy, you have to identify an actually existent problem. And you also have to have some sort of demand for it. I mean, I really don't think that Berlin women have actually complained to the local authorities about this. I just don't think that happened.
Yeah, I think the demand is not so much to remove actually existing offensive posters, but it's more about virtue signaling and sort of winning some sort of symbolic victory for their side. I sort of compare it to this issue of gender neutral bathrooms or unisex toilets, which is another solution in search of a problem. Who is actually affected by that? I mean, the number of people who are transgender in the first place is very, very tiny, and then almost all of them like clearly look male or clearly look female, so they're just going to use the appropriate bathroom for that, no problem. And the other ones, they just like pick one. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but
But it
still,
creates.
there's this huge push for these unisex toilets that it's not that there's some person that says I want to go to a unisex toilet. It's that we should have unisex toilets because some presumably oppressed people need them.
Yeah, and in the end, at best, it doesn't help anyone but pisses off everyone, and at its worst, it actually creates the hate that probably didn't exist there before.
Yeah, I mean that's just an with the unisex example as well as with the advertising board thing. It's going to be hugely costly. There's a lot of costs involved in changing these toilets, and there's a cost involved in running all these ads past this committee, but they don't care. It's not their money,
Yeah.
and their goal is not to run things efficiently. Their goal is to push through their ideology.
Yeah, as Joachim was telling me in the interview that I had with him, it's probably we're the stupid ones that we didn't go into feminist activism because it's getting profitable, or it is profitable, at least in some portions of Europe. But it is profitable at the taxpayer's expense, which is why the cause of smaller government is so well interconnected with the cause of anti-feminism, because look, if the government didn't have that much money, they wouldn't be able to pull these kinds of things. Although, in fairness, with Berlin, it's a very special example because they've been in the hole for what, a decade now, probably even more than that.
Yeah, but I
Like
mean, they don't really care. I mean, they're getting lots of money from the other Bundesländer because we have this sort of system set up. If you're in a deficit, if you're doing poorly financially, then the other Bundesländer have to support you financially, and so there's very little incentive for them to actually fix their finances.
Yeah, and Berlin is considered a separate Bundesland.
Yes.
It's amazing, amazing, amazing. And the argument from the left party that so such adverts don't give the impression that the sexes aren't equal or they don't meet eye to eye. Yeah, let's assume that's the case. So what? At best, they actually give the impression that the sexes aren't identical, which is true. So what exactly is the problem?
Yeah,
I mean, on one hand, the leftists claim that advertising isn't realistic, and they paint an unrealistic image to the customers, thus fooling the customers and thus oppressing them through capitalistic evil or whatever. But then they they go after them when they don't do that.
Yeah.
That's why I don't understand them. I mean, there was a time, I'm old enough to remember a time when leftism was at the very least coherently wrong, but at the very least coherent.
Yeah, I mean, being wrong is already sort of an achievement because it means you've already stated some sort of position that's coherent. But nowadays, a lot of that stuff is not even wrong. Doesn't even rise to that level of being coherent enough to be wrong.
Yeah, it's just like it's just in the area of what the really? Come on. Oh boy.
Also, just to point out, suits are generally not that comfortable. I mean, I don't know what suits you're wearing, but if I want to think of a man wearing something that covers him completely and is very comfortable, I don't think of a suit. The point of a suit is not to be comfortable. The point of the suit is to look good, to present yourself as being high status.
Yeah. There are very few suits that can fall into the category of comfortable, and most people, and consequently most men, can't afford those.
Yeah.
I mean, there are those.
Maybe if a suit that costs thousands of euros, that might be comfortable then. But I mean, even still,
Yeah,
that's
the ones
like
tailored specifically for you. Yeah.
yeah. If you're like wearing a necktie, these are really constricting and annoying to wear. At least that's my experience.
Mhm.
If I'm wearing something comfortable, I would wear like sweatpants and a t-shirt or something like that. And you're not going to find a lot of advertising portraying men in that way, unless they specifically want to portray them in a negative light.
Yeah, or they sell T-shirts.
Yeah, or sweatpants, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Speaking of what people wear, going to the next one, coming from the local France. French bus drivers slip into skirts for work to denounce shorts ban amid sizzling heat wave. Bus drivers in the western French city of Nantes have sported skirts to work to show bosses their anger over being banned from wearing shorts despite the punishing heat wave. A sweaty bus in any big city in France is not the place to be right now, given the heat wave that is currently baking much of the country. So spare a thou, I guess. Okay. Spare a thou for drivers, particularly those in the western city of Nantes, which have had their request to wear shorts to work turned down. The bus drivers denounced unacceptable conditions of work and made their point by wearing skirts for the day on Tuesday. Our uniform is not appropriate for those high temperatures. We envy women at moments like this, said Didier Sauvetre, a driver for the CFTT union, told the local Presse Océan news site. Given that skirts are an authorized outfit in the company, we are wearing skirts, he said. A modern outlook would allow us to wear long shorts from time to time. This is a form of discrimination. Women drivers can wear skirts, but not the men, said Gabriel Magnier, another union representative. In this heat wave, the temperatures are reaching close to 50 degrees Celsius behind our windscreens, and given we have no air conditioning on our buses, it is unbearable, he added. Although there is nothing in France's labor code that bars workers from wearing shorts, the decision often comes down to the company and depends on the type of job. The labor code does say workers can down tools if they believe their health is in danger due to working conditions. The bus company Semiton, however, believes shorts are not appropriate for the work of a bus driver. However, drivers say once they are locked inside the driver's cabins, no one can see them anyway. Semiton did take a step towards compromise in summer last year when it rolled out a new line in summer trousers for drivers that were lighter, but there's still no sign of them agreeing to shorts. This is not the first time bus drivers in France have complained about their uniforms. In April 2013, the local reported how bus drivers in Marseille were set to strike because of restrictive working conditions. In other words, their trousers were too tight. I won't be wearing them, one Marseille bus driver said at the time. You think we work for car repairing companies, Speedy. The shirts are all right, but those pants are far too tight, he added. We reject the bottom half of this uniform, added the union chief. And an update from almost 24 hours ago, the bus drivers in the western city of Nantes have been told they will be allowed to wear shorts after winning over company bosses by sporting skirts for a day in protest. So, a win?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it's that hot and you're forced to wear long trousers, that's
That
just
kind
like
of sucks.
yeah, that's really uncomfortable. And I mean, sort of the angle that they're going for is that it's sort of sexist that women get to wear skirts and men don't get to wear shorts. I don't particularly care about that angle, but just my point is just that it's stupid to have this sort of dress code.
Yeah.
That if the temperatures are really high, it's normal and appropriate to dress accordingly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like a bus driver is it's not like, I mean, if you're some sort of, say, like insurance representative, or you represent a bank or something like that, sort of high status occupation where people are expected to wear a suit and so on, then I guess can sort of understand that they weren't allowed to wear shorts because that would look stupid. But a bus driver, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Also, It does sound weird to me that they don't have air conditioning in the buses. I mean, come on, it's the current year. I mean, the work conditions that they describe here sound like what the public transport used to look here. I don't know, 20 years ago or something. Uh, I mean, the bosses there would be much better suited if they would spend the time getting buses with air conditioning rather than fighting with their employees over shorts at really? I mean, I really don't understand the bosses here, and I don't like unions, but but in this particular case, I really don't understand the bosses. I mean, why fight over such a stupid? Why? Just why?
Yeah, I guess air conditioning is expensive. I mean, we also don't have air conditioning in buses here for the most part in Regensburg where I live.
Mhm.
There's like maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 buses has air conditioning, and it's so much more comfortable in this heat. But usually just riding in this bus that's heated up to like 40 degrees, and there's lots of sweaty people around you, and it's really miserable.
Yeah, it is. It is, but then again, Nantes is one of the big cities. I mean, I can understand the smaller cities to be slower to roll out air conditioning and whatnot, but in a bigger city, I would have expected to have this fixed by now. And especially, I mean, if they could fix um, keeping up with those salary demands and those union regulations, which are infinite in France, uh, compared to what to how much those cost, air conditioning is remarkably cheap.
Yeah, probably, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, as for the sexist angle, I do agree it's not really that that much of a favorable angle. It would have probably gotten more traction had it been in Sweden. But in France, I don't think the sexist angle is really that much of a win. But still, driving at 50C, uh, just because some boss that sits in a probably air conditioned office thinks that the dress code is important. Yeah, that kind of sucks. It really does suck.
Yeah.
All right. Still, oh, and there was a similar piece of news that I didn't include because I forgot about it in a call center in Britain, where a guy came with a with a pink dress at
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
Uh, these kinds of protests appear to be quite efficient.
yeah. And there's sort of a bind here that, um, having like a separate dress code for men and women is apparently sexist these days, so that you can't have that.
Mhm,
And so you can sort of exploit that sort of loophole.
mhm. No.
I
Uh,
mean, I think it's perfectly fine to have a separate dress codes for men and women, but they still have to be appropriate and allow people to appropriately dress for the weather,
yeah. A
both men
bit
and
more.
women.
Yeah, a bit more flexibility wouldn't harm anyone.
Yep.
Uh, and in this particular case, I mean, the driver is absolutely correct. I mean, come on, once we go behind the wheel, nobody can even see us anymore. So who the hell even cares what we're wearing? Um, so yeah, it is absurd, and at the very least, this time after because as it appears, it's a quite an old problem. But at the very least, this time the bosses were like, yeah, whatever, uh, which is a much better attitude than previous examples.
Yep.
Right. Let's go to the next one. The next one is not really that impressive, except for the fact that the author of the article is a 14-year-old boy. So, coming from Boston, is manspreading really different than ladies with many bags? There would have never been a need to write an article like this had it not been for the manspreading bans. I was surfing on Facebook, and while browsing, I found an article from Verden's Gong. I clicked on it to see the headline, "Now This Will Be Forbidden in Madrid," with a picture of a man with scattered legs on the subway. I take the subway every day back and forth from school, and I see quote unquote manspreading every time. But I still don't want this prohibition. The solution is just to sit down beside them and then they'll move. Such is the case, at least with the men I've met in Norway. That's why, that's why they have not introduced this ban in Norway, I presume. The groups who have managed to introduce this prohibition seem like extreme feminists who do not think about what they do themselves. I see at least as many ladies sitting with the coffee cup on one seat and the purse on the other. It's quite harder to make them move. There are probably many who disagree when reading this, and you will probably be disagreeing as well because there are only a small percentage of ladies who do what I write, but they still do exist. What I'm trying to convey is that there is no ban on manspreading here in Norway. If there is to be a ban on those who have not learned proper behavior at home, I have some suggestions. Firstly, the prohibition must be must be clearly directed at both sexes, and secondly, there must be a picture of a person using one or two seats, and the sign ought to state the rules clearly. There would have never been a need to write an article like this, and at least had it not been for the increasing implementation of manspreading bans, manspreading with quotation marks and scare quotes. Parents must be able to teach their children to sit properly in public transport, and it is only embarrassing that adults are unable to take care of it themselves. I mean, this is such a bitch slap. I mean, it really is a bitch slap. So here comes the eighth grader and wipes the floor with feminists, just like that. Because the article isn't impressive at all. I mean, it's very short and whatnot, but it's really funny to read, and the comment sections, the comment section is just delicious. Aftenposten has lately gone the shitlord route in Norway, and they opened the free comment section, and they have this youth writing program where they have a separate column for people aged between 13 and 21, I think. And almost all of those articles, if you browse that specific section of the website, almost all of them are on politically incorrect topics, which is fantastic. It comes as yet another confirmation that the so-called Generation Z is far, far less less uptight than previous generations, particularly the millennials and the 60s generation.
Yeah, that really does give you hope for the future.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I just smiled when I saw this article. And I'm like, I just have to introduce this into the show. I mean, even kids get it. And it pretty much says what we were saying last week when I was in Sweden, and we had that Madrid manspreading article, and we said, why do you need the law? I mean, can't you just be a proper adult and just go to the person and say, can you move a little bit further because I can't fit? And that's the worst thing that you will have to do, because most of the time, as we were saying, most of these instances occur when the subway or whatever, it's mostly empty. But once it starts getting crowded, people actually do archive themselves to make room for the others.
Yeah, like if you're sitting next to someone who is quote unquote manspreading, you just like move a leg a bit to bump against his, and then he's usually going to make more space. You don't even have to say anything usually.
Yeah. And again, I say this. I mean, this kid has only been riding the Oslo subway, but I rode the subway in several European capitals and also non-capital cities that have subways, and this is pretty much a universal rule. I mean, how come most people can get it, yet feminists still feel the need to have a rule about this and involve the state over it? I mean, why?
I guess just lack of proper socialization.
I don't want to agree with this, but I guess I have to. And the worst part is not here in Europe. The worst part is across the pond in the States, where they can actually call the police, and the police is far more aggressive than it is in Europe. Because at the very least in Europe, these kinds of quote unquote crimes are actually civil offenses, so there's nothing really bad that can happen to you.
Yeah, at least in New York. I mean,
yeah,
the
but
vast
in New York,
majority of the US is significantly more sane in New York.
Sure, but where these things have been implemented, and of course New York is a stellar case, people have been arrested over this, and it's insane.
Yep.
It is amazing. And again, it comes from Madrid, where there is a majority socialist local council. It doesn't come from from a capital city where non-socialists are ruling. Uh, so again, what a shock! What a shock!
Yeah.
But still, the purpose of this article is just to show that the the kids are all right. I mean, the kids are starting to notice stuff. And if you go through, and this is something that I always recommend for people who want to have their morale lifted a little bit, go to the forums where late teenagers uh, tend to coalesce and look at the threads where they talk politics. You'll suddenly realize that the adult websites are remarkably moderate in comparison. And this is particularly true in Scandinavia. I mean, if you go in the forums where 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds coalesce, uh, you'll suddenly realize that the non-feminist, non-leftist adults are remarkably moderate in comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, I love these kinds of forums for the simple reason that they have so many good helicopter pictures with Marxists falling off them. So that's fantastic. Right, let's go to the next one. The next one is very, very serious one, and again, what it says in the article isn't particularly impressive. But it does say something about the widening corridor of opinion in Sweden because it's allowed for publication. Such thing, again, would have been rather impossible to imagine anywhere outside the fringes of the Swedish alternative media. Now it's pretty much mainstream. So, coming from Timber, the genderist march through institutions. In recent years, it has been recounted how public sector officials have used their positions to run their own ideological agenda. Most recently, Södertörn's district court has given up its official Twitter account for opinion formation purposes. A little earlier, the Swedish tax agency's staff had the hesitant pleasure of listening to a lecture by the activist Thomas Gunnarsson, known as the gender photographer. You remember we covered this on the show. For 20,000 kroner, taxpayers' money, Gunnarsson could put out the text of his political opinion on gender issues for state employees. The fact that political activists train staff in the public sector is unfortunately no isolated phenomenon, especially when it comes to genderist and so-called diversity issues. Most impact in this area has probably been inflicted by the RFSL lobby group, which conducts the so-called LGBTQ certification of government officials. A lobby organization which, for a fee, gives official staff a stamp of approval for their right opinions is an amazing achievement. No wonder that the organization already became the lobbyist of the year of the newspaper poll resume back in 2000. Activism within and towards the public sector usually flies under the radar because media interest in monitoring the phenomenon is low. However, Gunnarsson's lecture at the Swedish tax agency came to the public's attention as a staff member at the agency had the idea of tweaking selected quotes from the lecture through the official Twitter account. Suddenly, one of the state's most central government megaphone became the activist Gunnarsson's personal megaphone for his views. Last week, it happened again. Then the public on Twitter could tell how the Södertörn District Court borrowed its official Twitter account to base the selected quotes from a gender walk organized by Unison's Women's Youth Network at the agency's premises. Most notable was the finding that, quote, feminism means the recognition that we live in a patriarchal society where men as a group have more power than women as a group, end quote. A definition that not even all feminists stand behind and which is not up to the district court to determine. During the radicalization wave of the 1960s, it was often spoken in far-left circles about the long march through institutions as the overall revolutionary strategy. The phrase was coined by West German student leader Rudi Dutschke. Dutschke was, in turn, inspired by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who said that in order to carry out the socialist revolution, the revolutionaries must first take control of the institutions in a society. In particular, these were the institutions that influenced the thinking within that society, such as the culture, the media sector, and universities. Almost 50 years after 1968, the march through the institutions seems to have been completed and the participants have transitioned to the more vulnerable walk of sexual politics. The political activism of our authorities is so cemented that those who work within them are not even aware of it themselves. In other words, it is not certain that the persons who ratified the Swedish tax agency and Söderström's Twitter's account realize that they use the authorities as platforms for political activisms. As citizens, we should be grateful for these disasters. It is only when activism in this way, this overt way, reaches the light of the public that it becomes possible to criticize it and hopefully put it to a halt. Last year, the government's forest investigator, Charlotta Riberdal, was dismissed at a seminar in Almedalen where she participated in her official role and questioned the private ownership of forests. It is only when such responsibility is inflicted upon activism in the public sector, it is only when this happens when activism can be stopped. It is high time that activists begin the short march out of the institutions and be replaced by less ideologically committed officials. So
I like that last sentence.
Yeah, I loved it too. I mean, I just love this article, the way it is phrased. It is very concise. And again, 3 years ago, such rationale could only be read at best in the alternative media. And even there, it wasn't really that concise. I mean, there were very few people, even amongst the quote unquote extremists in Sweden, which would be very, very moderate people in normal countries. It was only those people who would, even many of those who couldn't actually make connections between cultural Marxism, long march through institutions, cultural hegemony, and in the end, the extreme genderist ideology that most of the Sweden's public apparatus still functions on. It was very, very hard. And well, I guess what I want to say is that Sweden has gone a long way.
Yeah, definitely. At least sort of parts of Sweden.
Yeah. Well, again, there is the part in the extreme north that didn't even have to, because extreme ideology hasn't even reached that place because it's too cold to go there. I mean, when you go further up north from Uppsala, it's literally a different country. Suddenly, most people have guns in their homes. Suddenly, most people will openly ask you, "What is a feminist?" You mean those degenerates that we see on TV? Yeah, we don't care about those. And I'm not joking, and they're not joking either. I mean, they're very sincere when they say, "What is a feminist? Really? What's that?" So the part that Swedes call Norrland, but again, those are portions that are only accessible by helicopter during winter time, and it's a very, very harsh territory. But most of the people live in the south, where this kind of insanity has infected pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And dismantling this, I'm under no illusions. I mean, I've met some very optimistic Swedes during this trip. But I'm under no illusion dismantling this shit is going to take at least a decade. But still, I mean, I was expecting to be at least 5 years until you could openly speak about these things without running the risk of being ostracized. So in just 3 years and a half, we already see them printed in mainstream outlets. So it's a fantastic achievement.
Yeah, I would like to offer an alternative explanation for why there's so few feminists and leftists up north in Sweden. Maybe it's because of those helicopters. Maybe they're afraid.
Could be, although the helicopters are only in the middle of the winter, so between December and March, because the layer of snow is so high that there's just no way you're gonna get there using any other mean. Well, except maybe a sleigh if you have a. but yeah. I don't know. It's just that it's harsh. It's a very harsh climate, and as we've come to be accustomed, the new leftists tend to be very bourgeois themselves. I mean, they're not. They're no longer what they used to be the case. The working class who lived in harsh conditions and whatnot. No. Most of the leftists today are these kinds of people who live in very, very comfortable places, usually the most expensive places, such is the case in Sweden and in most of Europe, actually. And they don't know what hardship really is.
Yeah, I mean,
because you
modern
have to afford leftism these days.
modern leftism and feminism is a very sort of degenerate and decadent ideology that can only sort of come about by removing yourself from the harsh realities of life. And if you're sort of daily fighting a battle against nature, essentially against the cold, then you don't have time to indulge in speculation about the patriarchy oppressing you. No, I mean, what's oppressing you is nature. It's the cold. It's right there. The patriarchy
Yeah.
is what protects you from that.
Yeah, basically. And I have actually been to the area. I mean, probably 90% of militant leftists in Sweden live in one place, which is territorially wise, it's a huge neighborhood. It's called Södermalm in Stockholm. And I've been there because there was a truck of peace incident, and I wanted to videotape the follow up to that. But because Stockholm is such a huge city territorially wise, by the time we got there, the police had cleaned up everything. But whilst I was there, I turned on the camera and started videotaping the places where these people live, and it is by far the most comfortable place that you can find in, at least in Stockholm. I've seen some places that are nicer than that in Göteborg, but it's a very comfortable place, very homogeneous. I mean, the only immigrant that I've seen in the entire area was an Indian guy working at the kitchen. Other than that, there are no immigrants in Södermalm, even though that's the most pro open borders portion of the country. Um, and yeah, it is the most expensive area. Well, actually, second most expensive. There is another one that is even more expensive, but still, I mean, an apartment there goes way above 3.5 million euros. It's remarkably expensive. There's vegan shops every corner, and bars that are proudly vegan and whatnot. I mean, it's an alternate reality, really. And the only reason that that area can afford to exist is because the rest of Sweden is not really that insane. Because otherwise, I mean, good luck building an entire country using the pattern from Södermalm. And this is where those people live. Almost all of them live there. Very few of them live anywhere else. Um, Most of the media people live there. Most of the activists from the leftist political parties. I mean, think about it this way: in terms of voting patterns, roughly 40% of that neighborhood voted last time for the feminist initiative, whereas nationwide they got like 2.2% or something like that. So, and again, 30% of that area votes for the environmentalist party, whereas the general country voted like 4%, 4.2% for the Green Party. So it's a very special place, and that's where most of this insanity comes from.
Yeah, I would guess that most Swedish construction workers are not particularly concerned about norm critique.
Yeah. You'd be surprised how. Speaking of construction workers, I've gone right next to a construction site in Göteborg, and the workers had a lunch break or something, and the only thing that you could hear from, even if you hadn't spoken Swedish, you could really understand what they were talking about. They were talking about football and the trouble with the lunacy from the parliament and the mass immigration. That's the only three things that they were talking about. They weren't talking about how oppressed they are by the patriarchy, or about gender quotas, or about their latest vegan meal, or none of that shit. None of that shit. And I'm pretty sure nobody is surprised to hear that. But yeah, and the thing is, and probably this will gonna be a huge topic of study for me for the next 2 years, I guess. How the hell is it possible? Because this is not the first time. I mean, similar things have happened in other countries too. I mean, heck, even in Germany, even though it's a much bigger country, you have a huge number of a disproportionate areas, such as that district in Berlin, where a lot of the media people, a lot of the quote unquote influencers, all of them live in very much similar areas. And how the hell is it possible for such a minuscule militant minority to get to control for such a long period of time the narrative of entire countries?
Yeah, but it's sort of the force multiplier of the media, I guess. Mostly it's because it makes a lot of sense to have most of your media sort of concentrated in a smaller area. That sort of thing happens for a lot of industries, when you're most, like, take for example something like book publishing in the United States. More or less all book publishers in the United States are in a particular part of New York. It's not like it's impossible to run book publishing anywhere else. You could, of course, run a book publishing company in I don't know, California or Florida, wherever. But it's just sort of all the industry people are there. So if you're anyone in publishing, if you're a writer, you might want to move there. If you're an agent, you want to move there, because all the people are there in a small area, and it makes conducting business a lot easier if people are just physically close. So you often have these sort of industries set up in small geographic areas, and if I mean, a lot of people want to live near people who are like them, who think like them, who have similar kind of jobs, because more likely to connect with people who are similar to you, and that's why you get this sort of concentration. It's also why with immigration you get these diasporas, where you have lots of people from a particular country that are congregated in a particular part of one particular city, instead of just being like diffused over the whole country.
Yeah, and unless you have a concerted effort to have the immigrants diffused, then yeah, these kinds of things are pretty much inevitable, unless you take precautions beforehand. You know, the Swedes actually used to have precautions for that. That was before full lunacy was achieved. For instance, there is that guy on YouTube, Angry Foreigner. He's actually a child refugee from Bosnia. And during the war with Serbia, and he was sent into a very, very remote village away from anyone else who spoke Serbian/Bosnian. They're actually the same language, but they pretend they're different. I'm not joking. There's like two words that differ, and they differ in pronunciation. The writing is identical. Anyway, so he was sent very, very remote, and enrolled into a school. Admittedly, he was like 7 or 6, something like that, when he went to Sweden. And so, being a far away from other immigrants like him, integration for him was remarkably easy, because it's not like he really had any much of a choice. I mean, if you wanted to do well in school and whatnot, you had to learn Swedish really fast, and had to try to keep up with everyone else. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the perfect policy, but it's definitely a much better policy than what has been applied since then. Not just in Sweden, in other places too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily that it's there's a bad thing to be around people like you, but if you want people to integrate, then having these sorts of very concentrated immigrant populations, where in a particular area, like half the people are going to be from one particular foreign country, that's very harmful to integration. These people are not going to integrate nearly as quickly, and that's especially the case if you have some sort of generous welfare system where these people aren't forced to work, so so many of them are unemployed, and then they just sit at home all day and talk to their countrymen, and integration just doesn't take place.
Yeah, like I've seen in Rinkeby in Stockholm, also known as Little Mogadishu. There was a significant chunk of the people walking down the streets couldn't speak Swedish at all. I mean, you really needed an interpreter for Arabic or Somali. That kind of thing is horrifying.
Yep.
Anyway, what I still don't understand, and okay, that's a very, very, very good argument that you made with all the people in the industry are in one place, so this kind of attracts new people in the industry to move in the same area and whatnot. Okay, but media has changed quite a lot recently, which is why most, especially non-leftist media uh, institutions that are opening up in Sweden, their owners don't live there. Their employees don't live there. They live in different places, including some of them in very quote unquote diverse places. So it is possible, but it just seems to me that when these kinds of things happen, it creates that kind of unhealthy bubble, because the activists, that all of them tend to live in one place, they don't see anything else. And I was overhearing a conversation in a bar in Södermalm, where all the leftists live, and they were astounded by the fact that oh my god, we wrote so many things and about the Sweden Democrats and how bad they are and whatnot, and yet they still keep on growing, and they simply don't understand the country they live in anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to live in a bubble. I live in a bubble. I live in a wealthy first world country. I interact mostly with other middle class people who are sort of fairly well educated, fairly well off, and I like it that way. I wouldn't want to interact with third world refugees. Not that I have anything against them, just they're just not my kind of people, and I have very little in common with them. And I also don't have to fight with the forces of nature on a daily basis. I live in a very sort of
That's very nice.
protected space, and I like it. I like it like that. But if I want to be a journalist, I sort of it's an obligation to also know something about what's happening outside of your bubble.
Mhm.
If I write articles assuming that everyone lives the kind of live, I'm going to not be a very good journalist.
Mhm.
It's fine to live in a bubble, but you sort of have to be aware of that you're living in
Yeah.
a bubble, that your experience is not representative of the population as a whole.
No, and this is precisely you hit the nail in the head with that. It's not that just that many journalists, particularly in Sweden, but also in many other places, live in a bubble. That maybe in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the awareness of the existence of the bubble has just vanished, slowly but surely, and that definitely affects the quality of their work.
Yeah, and it's just as a journalist, that's just really bad. A journalist is supposed to know at least a little bit about everything, to know how people live, how things are going on. But if you have this very blinkered perspective, you're just not doing your job.
Yep. Right. Let's talk a little bit more about preferences, using the pattern of an article that. Yeah. Holy shit! Take it away.
Okay, mentally preparing myself for this. Coming from the Huffington Post, an open letter to gay white men. No, you're not allowed to have a racial preference. Quote, you may want to take my words to heart if you'd like to live up to those progressive memes you share on Facebook all the time. Dear gay white men, before I begin, I want you to understand that I'm not calling all of you racist. I've never been one to throw that word around casually, and even though I'm sure there are some that that word would fit like a glove, I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you, the cisgendered, white, gay men out there who hold no ill will toward minorities, especially black and brown ones, but somehow have never found themselves in bed with one. You're good guys. I know this to be true. You mean well when it comes to race relations, but as a white man in the world, you must admit you have no clue what it means to be racially discriminated against. As a result, there are often times when you don't recognize when your behavior towards people of color veers into problematic territory. As a black man within the gay community, I recognize that shit all the time and have a few points I'd like to discuss with you. I'm not here to judge you. There's only one capital HIM, and it's not me. But you may want to take my words to heart if you'd like to live up to those progressive memes you share on Facebook all the time. Let's start with the epicenter of your problematic behaviors toward my kind. Your dating app profile. I know it can be hard to find the right words when expressing your preferences when it comes to what you're looking for in a partner. Whether you're looking for Mr. Right or Mr. Yeah, Daddy, right there. But I can't help but notice that a lot of you get lost, like really lost, when it comes to stating your preferences properly. To be clear, you're allowed to describe the kind of guy you're looking for and the things that turn you on, but specifying the race of your desired partner is a line that is not to be crossed. It comes off as racist, and that's because it is. I should point out that I've had this conversation with more than a couple of white gays in person, and here is where the debate usually begins, so I'm going to assume that you're rolling your eyes at me right about now. That's fine, and to make you feel more heard, I'll even repeat the most common point used to counter my argument. Quote, but people like what they like, can't change that. I've heard that excuse, or some iteration of it, used many times, almost as if it's a magic phrase that just kind of ends the conversation and absolves you of your bullshit. I'll put aside the fact that broadcasting your distaste for an entire race, or multiple races, in the year 2017 is really dumb, in addition to being racist as fuck, and just challenge the reasoning here head on. Yes, people like what they like, but sometimes the things people like are racist, like lawn jockeys or the current president of the United States. You can't say you prefer one race of people as romantic partners or anything really to another because all of the people who belong to one race are not the same. No matter how you slice it, it's racist. But what if black and Asian men choose to only date other black and Asian men? Isn't that racist too? No. And you tried it. Look, all men are created equal, but all men are not valued equally, especially in this country. Every black and Asian man who grew up on this planet grew up surrounded by positive images of whiteness and white men. Therefore, our desire to date within our own race, when we choose to, is not rooted in any assertion made by society that we're better than anyone else. I know this is a lot to digest, so I'll just boil it down to this. If your preference for partner supports an existing racial hierarchy, which marginalizes minorities, then your preferences are racist. And yes, that includes your rice queens and chocolate chasers too. Fetishizing me is not a compliment, it's propping up harmful sexual stereotypes, and it too is racist. As I've said before, I've had this conversation many times, so I know what comes next. You're saying to yourself, damn, if I don't go for men of color, I'm racist. If I do, I'm racist. Well, yes. If you're making any of your dating decisions with a person's race in mind, that's racist. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you have to find all black and Asian men attractive. I sure as hell don't. What I'm saying is that men of color are still men, and as such, we want the people making decisions about our desirability to make them based on who and what we are, and that doesn't begin and end with a few layers of melanin. Quote, fine, I'm a horrible racist asshole. What can I do about it? I can't reprogram myself to find men of color more attractive, some of you might be saying. Actually, you can. As you know, the brain is the largest sexual organ in your body and is capable of amazing growth. Think of it like learning a new language, better still, think of it like unlearning a racist one. In social psychology, there's a theory called the mere exposure effect. Simply put, the more we expose to someone, the more attractive they become to us. See, there's hope for you after all. You can decide how best to expose yourself however you want, but please, for the good of us POC, who have to share this community with you, get to work. As gay men of color who get more than enough discrimination from the rest of the world, as gay men of color, we get more than enough discrimination from the rest of the world. We don't need the friendly fire from you.
Question. Is this satire?
I don't think so. I think this
Okay,
person...
I've got to throw in on this real quick.
Please.
If this isn't satire, and he's saying, hey, you have a choice. with who you're attracted to, well, then I guess the religious right has it correct.
Definitely has a point to make, yeah.
So essentially what he's saying is that he's a misogynist. Because he's just arbitrarily decided he's not going to date any women.
Yep.
There you go.
Therefore, he hates women.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. The reason I asked if it is satire is because it wouldn't be the first time when Huffington Post is trolled that hard. It just isn't. It happened, what was it, a month ago, when some philosophy major wrote an article about how white men shouldn't vote. And it turned out to be a gigantic troll by the people around the website ageofshitlords.com. This is why I'm asking whether this is satire or not. And the left has killed satire, basically, because it is getting harder and harder to distinguish.
Yeah.
As for the mere exposure effect, as James basically said, if this is true, then the religious right has a point. Using the mere exposure effect, we could expose gays a lot more to women and turn them into normal people and straight people and expunge the gayness out of them. Oh wait, it doesn't work that way. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, not doing that would obviously be sexist. So,
Obviously,
I mean, by his own logic.
Yeah, by his own logic. I mean, this guy is literally advocating for conversion therapy, or what is it called? It has a name.
Yeah, conversion therapy.
Conversion therapy, right? So yeah, he's basically advocating for that, except not on sex grounds, but on racial grounds. Pretty much same shit.
Yep.
And the thing is that another reason why we cannot really assess whether this is satire or not, whether Huffington Post was really, really trolled again, or this guy is actually that stupid, is because this kind of point, we've heard it made it legitimately so in other feminist outlets. I don't know if you remember, it was about a year ago when I think it was New Statesman. Yeah, either New Statesman or The Guardian, one of these far left British outlets, who published a very similar article written by a feminist lady. Feminist female, I would say, not really a lady, judging by the language. And she was basically making the same point, that there is a huge streak of misogyny and racism amongst gay white men. So that's why I can't really know whether this is satire or not, because there definitely is a significant proportion, perhaps even a majority, but definitely a significant minority at the very least, of progressives who actually believe this.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, you have gay men broadcasting their distaste for an entire sex or multiple sexes. I guess that doesn't fit here. For an entire sex in the year 2017, that's really dumb, in addition to being sexist as fuck. And, I mean, obviously. It just fits like a glove.
Yeah, it does. It does. And this is one of the reasons, and I don't know if it will work, but this is one of the reasons why I support people like Milo Yiannopoulos, because he's doing exactly what should have been done decades ago. These quote-unquote gay culture has been subverted so far to the left that I would dare to argue that it even alienates some of their own members, let alone the rest of the society. I mean, it is getting, and quite frankly, I shouldn't be giving a toss about that. But the problem is that this particular culture is influencing the rest of the society too. So that's why I do give a damn. Because in the end, I mean, if this thing is left unfettered and nobody smashes, metaphorically speaking, that nobody smashes their skulls against the pavement, this kind of thing will eventually ferment a lot more quote-unquote homophobia, or I would say create actual homophobia. because most people would be far less inclined to have anything against gays if this bollocks would be toned down, or even better, non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of agitation maybe made sense in an era when there was a lot of prejudice against gay people, and most people believed that homosexuality should be illegal altogether, or at least gay sex. In that sort of environment, it makes sense to go with this very provocative message and to sort of force civil society to confront this problem, because otherwise it just gets swept under the rug. But nowadays, when gay people have basically won in terms of the rights being denied to them, they've gained more or less all the rights that were previously denied to them, and they've won more or less cultural acceptance. Now it's time to tone down the rhetoric, because now they have a lot to lose. Previously, they had nothing to lose, or not nothing to lose, but a lot less to lose. They were already reviled, but now they should go for like less of an all-out risk strategy. They should go for something safer, something that preserves the right that they currently have, and doesn't risk it all by alienating more and more people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does show, and this is not limited to gay rights at all. It tends to manifest itself in most identity politics rights group organizations. This tendency of always producing more of the activism, even long after the issues on it have been won. And I don't know if there is a way to stop this, particularly with the case of gay rights. That's why, as I said, subverters like Yiannopoulos are, I would almost go as far as to say, a godsend, even though I don't believe in God. But in this particular case, fine. But in other cases, such as feminism, such as, because this is mostly about the United States, although this kind of thing again is very, this train of thought is very present in Europe too. But in the United States, the quote unquote racial rights groups, many of them should have been dissolved a decade ago or 2 decades ago. Many of them still do continue to exist for no other reason than just to produce agitation, and if left up, and to milk funding, of course, yeah, because it is very, very profitable to be in this cottage industry, and I don't know how to stop them, because in many cases, for their own good, it would be better if they would just stop.
Not necessarily for their own good, but at least for the good of the
people
population that they're supposedly representing.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate AVFM so much, because in the beginning, AVFM went with this fuck their shit up strategy when men's rights was something that no one was talking about. They went for this very aggressive approach to get attention and sort of force people to take notice. But now that we're having some success, they're starting to tone it down a bit. And that's exactly what you want.
Yeah, we changed several times after the mission was accomplished. I mean, it's not just slogans and whatnot, but generally the approach. I mean, even now, recently, the motto has been changed again from changing cultural narrative to something else, because, well, we already won on that, and there's already enough people doing that, so there's no reason to dwell on the exact same cause well after it has been pretty much achieved. I mean, in 2012, there were 2 or 3 YouTube channels, and in 2013 then started this show talking about these things. It was necessary to go very aggressive. Nowadays, when there's entire YouTube channels with millions of subscribers, and there's mainstream coverage, and there's international conferences on this issue, yeah, maybe focusing the entire energy on changing the cultural narrative, it's not necessarily that productive anymore. It's that called the law of what is it called? The law of diminishing returns, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So you move to something else. But with these LGBTists, because it is an ideology, the LGBTist ideology, that's what I always call it, because it has very little, if anything, to do with gay people. It has a lot to do with promoting a narrative, an ideology. They still haven't figured it out. And I don't know. I don't think they will, because the mindset under which they operate is the mindset of perpetual revolution.
Yeah, and that's why they have to keep making up new issues. I mean, like if you had told people, I don't know, 50 years ago, during the civil rights movement in the United States, that 50 years down the line, gay black men are going to complain that gay white men are racist because they would rather date someone of their own race, then people would say you're insane.
Yeah, they definitely laughed at you.
Yeah, and I mean, if someone opposed to the civil rights movement would have brought this up as sort of as an as an argument to say that we should have to stop this at the roots, but before this sort of insanity happens, everyone would have declared him insane and said that this is a stupid argument. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but here we are.
Yeah, which is why I've come, on these kinds of issues, I've gotten. I used to be very, very liberal on these kinds of issues. I've gotten further and further to the right, towards the conservative side, precisely because I can no longer say, "Oh, it's a slippery slope." Well, you sure about that? Because a slippery slope ceases to be a slippery slope when evidence of that slope actually emerges. And it's not just with this kind of thing. I always get flack when I make this comparison, but there's a lot of insanity, in the sense of very, very extreme ideas running right through the at least the official quote unquote gay community. Because let's make it very clear right from the get-go, at least my issue is not with non-straight people per se. It's with the ideologues, which some of them aren't even gay themselves. They're just professional activists. And within this ideologically militant community, the LGBTists, as I call them, there are a lot of bad ideas. This one being one prime example, and it's not the only one. If you remember, there was about 3 weeks ago, there was a report coming out with the documents linking LGBTist groups to NAMBLA and to Antifa and to revolutionary unions in Detroit. I mean, all of these motherfuckers are connected to each other, and all of the bad ideas seem to be coalescing around this ideologically driven community.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what kind of documents you're talking about. I didn't see those, so I can't comment on that.
One second. I think that would be, there you go. Oh, it was a bit more than that. Militant Antifa activists have deep ties to notorious NAMBLA pedophiles. It's the article. I'm going to link it to you in our private chat. And from there, you have the links to the documents and whatnot.
Okay.
And it also ties also with the By All Means Necessary, which are the militant communists, and also several smaller but still relevant LGBTist organizations. It's a clusterfuck. And whenever you bring this up, you get a lot of butthurt in the comment sections. Oh my God, how dare you compare us to the? And I'm like, no, I'm comparing an ideological group with another ideological group who happen to be friends with each other. And if this shit isn't addressed, and that again, that's why I like people like Milo Yiannopoulos, because he's willing to address this shit at a tremendous personal cost, I would say. But still, someone needs to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a new phenomenon that leftist groups are associated with pedophilia promotion.
Yes. Yes.
For example, you had this with the Green Party in Germany in the 80s and 90s. They had lots of ties to pedophilia groups, and there were a lot of unsavory stuff going on that people
They had their own
today
nurseries. They had their own nurseries, funded in part by the Green Party, where they would groom children. I remember reading that. I think it was either in Bild or Der Spiegel, one of these two. Yeah. Same thing in the 60s in France. Our very good friend Simone de Beauvoir was very involved alongside with her lover in a group called the Pedophile Liberation Movement or Liberation Initiative, something like that. I wrote about that 4 years ago. Yeah, it's not a new phenomenon, but it keeps on coming up. It keeps on coming back, and whenever we bring this up, we always get called conspiracists and whatnot, even though there is irrefutable evidence that it keeps on happening.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that when you start to reject all sorts of traditional societal values, sometimes you overthrow societal values that are actually oppressive, that are actually not that important. But other times you just throw overboard a lot of very sensible societal attitudes that are there for a reason and that serve very important functions. Like, for example, the idea that having sex with children is maybe not such a good idea.
Yeah, amazing. And also, this kind of militant activism that we see in this article from the Huffington Post and in many others, again, this is not really a new argument coming from the progressive side. This is one of the reasons why I'm not really so down to earth, so down with quote unquote anti-racist causes, because I'm like, oh, it's racist to, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, so what? No, seriously, so what? And this is again something very sensitive and dangerous to say in certain circles, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Not everything that's racist is necessarily evil. I mean, yeah, I can definitely agree that it is racist to want to have sex with whites more than non-whites. So what?
I mean, I wouldn't call it racist. I mean, that sort of risk watering down the racist label so much that it becomes basically meaningless.
You're late to that party. The left has done that already.
But I mean, it's not the sort of it's not the way the word racist is understood by a normal person. By the average man on the street is not going to understand racism as having some sort of racial preference for dating. I mean, even if we assume, for the sake of argument, that race is only skin deep, then still it should matter a lot to dating, because the way a person looks is kind of important to sexual attraction.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, even if there's no other differences between races, clearly we have to agree that different races look very differently.
Yep.
Having preferences for how people look should not be in any way surprising or in some way blameworthy.
Yep. And for until very recently, when we started to understand attraction a little bit more, it was the basis for how people mated with each other for several tens of thousands of years. So yeah, it's not like something you can change through the mere exposure effect, as this loon argues in his article. No. You're not going to change evolution that fast, mate. Because again, most of these pressures apply to gays as well, just like it applies to straight people.
Yeah, and as far as the argument that this writer brings up here, that not all black people are the same and not all Asian people are the same. Yeah, sure enough, but there are only so many hours in the day, and you can only date so many people, and if you already know that on average I'm going to find a white person much more attractive than a black person or Asian person, then it makes sense to only date white people. Just like, let me give you a different example. So I don't like films that star Jason Statham. I think they're stupid films made to appeal to people with an intellectual age of 12. So I don't watch these kinds of films. I've seen some excerpts, and they're enough to make me realize that I'm probably not going to enjoy them. But I haven't sat through any of his films from start to finish. Maybe if I watched a couple of them, I would find some that are actually not that bad. But I'm just not going to do that because I have only so much time, and I'd rather, if I'm going to watch a film, I'd rather watch a film where there's a higher chance that I'm actually going to enjoy it. Does this mean I'm a horrible, bigoted, anti-Jason Stathamist?
Yeah, you're a Jason Stathamist for sure.
I mean, I'm discriminated against him. I'm refusing to watch films where he stars. That's clearly hurting him. It means that there's less box office sales and less DVD sales and whatever, and television films starring Jason Statham would potentially have lower advertising revenue. I mean, they're not, because don't have a Nielsen box on the television, so they're not going to actually know them watching, but sort of theoretically.
Theoretically, yeah.
Also, all the people most discriminating is all the people who work on Jason Statham films. All the directors and writers and fellow actors and the producers and the camera people and the makeup people and everyone else involved. All these people want to make a living, and I'm just here unfairly depriving them of the revenue that they could derive from me, just because I have this prejudice against Jason Statham films. But I mean, you have to have these kinds of prejudices because you have to live in the real world. You have to make decisions based on limited information. And that's just as true in the dating market. There's only so many people you can date, and you'd rather date people where there's a higher chance of that working out, of you finding them attractive and so on, than just having like a crapshoot where you just randomly assign a person just for the sake of not being a bigot.
Yeah, it really does seem to me, you hit the nail in the head when you said you have to live in the real world. It really does seem that this author hasn't. It just seems that it is that bubble thingy again. It just seems that he hasn't. I mean, most individuals, gay or straight, live in the real world where you have to make snap decisions all the time on many topics, including, of course, dating. So in the real world, applying the progressive orthodoxy or religion, it's just hard. And this is why I keep comparing them with a religion, because this sounds like the discourse of a fundamentalist, of a religious fundamentalist. We have so many demands upon the followers, the adherents. Now, admittedly, he addresses it. I mean, he starts with the dear gay white men, but then he continues to say that he addresses particularly those who share progressive memes on Facebook or whatnot. So he addresses his co-religionists in a way.
Yep.
But still, I mean, and I don't know how this. We had some attempts on AVFM. I don't know how well they worked because we don't keep data on demographics. But there were some attempts on AVFM to have this kind of thing addressed a little bit, and the feedback was quite positive. But a lot more needs to be done for sure to subvert the quote-unquote gay community away from this fundamentalist religion that is progressivism, because I'm just going to keep going back to my initial point. It just creates a lot more hate, and it doesn't really solve anything. It doesn't really forward any worthy cause, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, creating this sort of division would make sense if they had a worthy cause to fight for, but they just currently don't.
Yeah.
I mean, a discrimination on the frequency with which people swipe right on Tinder is just not a important enough cause to start some sort of social movement. I'm sorry, it's just not.
Yeah,
You
basically.
have no right to be found attractive by other people.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, basically. Right. So I'm out of things to say other than to reiterate that this author is a moron. I mean, he is.
And a
I mean,
misogynist. And a misogynist.
and the misogynist. Yeah, that's very important to note. It's a misogynist. He's a misogynist. So in this regard, the feminists have a point with this particular guy, that there's a lot of misogyny in the gay culture. I don't know how much it is, but this guy is a misogynist, using his own logic. I actually don't think he's a misogynist. I just think he's a fool. But
Yep.
yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty much out of things to say. What I will say is that next Saturday I have a lot of filming to do. So you'll find out Monday or Tuesday whether I'll be able to come on June the 30th. I'll try to let you guys know in due time if I can come or not. Most likely I will, but still completely not sure. I'm gonna know tomorrow evening what my schedule will be. So once I know that, I'll let you know if we'll do a show on June the 30th or not. I really hope we do. So yeah, that's pretty much all the things I had to say. 91 minutes, amazing efficiency.
I mean, it's not so much efficiency. It was a really short news section. I mean,
Yeah. Well, come on, let me brag.
It is important to set yourself manageable goals. That's
Mhm.
that's great.
It raises morale.
Yeah, you have to have exceeded our quota, and yeah. So the only thing that remains for me to say is would invite you to come visit my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com. One word, orthogonalideas.com. And I guess I'll see you possibly next week, probably next week, but otherwise in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.